99 men, husbands, fathers, sons. They kissed their families goodbye, climbed below the surface, and were never seen again. The Navy said, "We searched everywhere." But the families asked one question. Then why did you stop so soon? The distress signals were real. The coordinates were known. And yet, silence. Decades passed. Documents were locked away. Witnesses were told, "Don't speak." And somewhere, deep beneath the ocean, 99 men are still waiting for someone to finally tell the truth. Welcome, dear friends. Welcome to Marine Discovery Hub, the place where the ocean gives up its secrets, one story at a time. Now, before we go any further, they want to ask something, and they are going to ask it very gently, the way one asks a wise elder for a small favor. Friend, if you are watching this right now, if you have lived enough years to know that the truth is always buried somewhere, then they are speaking directly to you. They ask you, with great respect, please press that subscribe button. It is a small button, smaller than a teacup, easier than tying shoelaces, and it costs nothing at all. Just one gentle press, and you will never miss a single story from Marine Discovery Hub. Think of it as reserving your seat at the most important table in the room. Now, they also want to know something. Where in this beautiful world are you watching from right now? Are you watching from a quiet room in America? Perhaps a warm evening in Pakistan? Maybe from across the seas in the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia? Drop your country in the comments below. They read every single one. It always amazes them how people from every corner of this earth come together for one story about truth. And today's truth is one of the heaviest ones they have ever carried. Because somewhere beneath the cold, dark water, there is a steel vessel that the Navy wishes the world would simply forget. But Marine Discovery Hub does not forget, and neither do the 99 families who are still waiting for answers. So settle in, dear friend, turn up the volume, because this story begins right now. The year was 1968. The Cold War was not just a political tension. It was a living, breathing threat that sat beneath every ocean on Earth. Navies from both sides of the world were watching each other, tracking each other, and sending submarines into waters that were never meant to be questioned. It was in this climate of silence and suspicion that a submarine was given its orders. The vessel was a warship, powerful, modern for its time, and crewed by 99 of the finest men the Navy had to offer. These were not ordinary sailors. They were trained professionals, men who understood the risks of deep water, men who had families waiting at home, men who trusted the institution they served with their very lives. The submarine slipped beneath the surface without ceremony. No crowds, no cameras, just the cold water closing over the hull, and silence. For a short time, communications were normal. Routine signals were exchanged. Nothing suggested that anything was wrong. But then at a moment that investigators would later argue over 4 decades, the signals stopped. Not gradually, not with a distress call or a warning. They simply stopped. And the ocean said nothing. When the silence became impossible to ignore, the Navy was notified. And this is where the story begins to change, because the response that followed did not look like urgency. It did not look like panic. It looked, to many who studied it later, like an institution that already knew something it was not prepared to say out loud. The 99 men aboard that submarine had families on shore, wives who cooked dinner and waited, children who ran to the window every time a car passed on the street, parents who told themselves, "He will come home. He always comes home." They did not know yet that somewhere in the deep, their loved ones had already passed into a darkness from which no Navy would ever bring them back. Imagine losing someone you love and being told they are being searched for, while the searchers are already going home. There is a certain kind of cruelty in the world that does not announce itself loudly. It does not arrive with anger or violence. It arrives quietly, in the form of paperwork, delayed phone calls, and search operations that end far too soon. This is exactly what the families of 99 men experienced. In the weeks that followed the disappearance of their submarine, when a vessel goes missing at sea, there is an international expectation, a moral obligation, that every available resource will be deployed immediately. Hours matter. Every single hour matters. Because if survivors exist, if men are trapped inside a damaged hull on the ocean floor, breathing the last pockets of recycled air, then time is not just precious. Time is everything. But what the families witnessed, what investigators later documented with cold precision, was something that looked nothing like urgency. The search response was slow, slower than it should have been. For a navy with the resources, the technology, and the coordinates, ships were sent, yes, but not enough ships, and not fast enough. Certain zones of ocean, zones that fell directly within the submarine's last known trajectory, were quietly restricted, not open for search, restricted. And when Allied vessels offered to assist when other nations extended their hand in solidarity, the offer was met with hesitation, with bureaucratic delay, with a kind of careful diplomatic language that, when translated honestly, simply means no. The families began asking questions. Quietly at first, the way people ask questions when they still believe in the system. They wrote letters, they made phone calls, they sat in government offices on hard wooden chairs, and they waited. But the answers they received were not answers at all. They were performances of answers, carefully worded statements that said everything and revealed nothing. One widow later recalled being told that the search had been thorough and extensive. She had a map. She had looked at the coordinates herself. She knew what thorough should have looked like. This was not it. And then came the moment that changed everything. For those paying close attention, other sailors, men who had been aboard vessels operating in the same waters during the same period, began speaking quietly among themselves. Some of them reported unusual activity, strange sounds detected on sonar equipment, a location, a time, details that matched to with uncomfortable precision the final hours of the missing submarine. But these men were not encouraged to come forward. They were not invited to give testimony. Several of them later claimed they were visited, and advised in language that was polite but unmistakable, to say nothing. One retired officer, speaking decades later from the safety of old age, said something that has never left the minds of those who heard it. He said, "We knew where she was. We knew within the first week." He paused. Then he said, "That's exactly why they stopped looking. The ocean kept it secret. But the Navy was keeping a different kind of secret entirely. Not the secret of where the submarine rested, but the secret of why it was allowed to rest there. Undisturbed, unrecovered, unexplained. 99 men, left on the ocean floor, while the institution that sent them there, quietly, closed the file. There is something they never teach in school, about how governments handle the truth. They do not destroy it. That would be too obvious. Instead, they simply bury it, file by file, stamp by stamp, until the truth becomes so deep that only the most determined hands can ever reach it. Classified documents do not classify themselves. Someone sits at a desk, someone picks up a stamp, and someone makes a deliberate decision that the public must not know this. That decision was made many times in the years that followed the disappearance of 99 men, and it is in the careful study of what was hidden that the most disturbing picture begins to emerge. The first cracks appeared slowly, as they always do. Years after the submarine vanished, a small number of internal documents were released, not willingly, but through the persistent legal pressure of families who had refused, decade after decade, to simply move on. What those documents revealed was not a story of tragedy, it was a story of management. The language inside those files was not the language of grief. It was the language of containment. Words carefully chosen, sentences deliberately constructed, to describe catastrophe without ever assigning cause, without ever assigning blame, and most importantly, without ever answering the one question that 99 families had been asking for years. Investigators and independent researchers who studied the evidence began to identify 3 possible explanations, each one more uncomfortable than the last. The first possibility was friendly fire, that the submarine was struck, accidentally or otherwise, by a weapon fired from another vessel operating in the same waters, a vessel from the same navy, and that the decision to conceal this was made not out of malice, but out of the oldest institutional instinct in existence, self-preservation. The second possibility was experimental weapons testing. Declassified records from the same era revealed that certain stretches of ocean were being used for weapons programs that were never publicly acknowledged, programs that used live ordnance, programs that operated in the dark, and if a submarine, even a friendly one, had wandered into the wrong coordinates at the wrong moment, the consequences would have been catastrophic and deeply inconvenient. The third possibility was perhaps the most haunting of all, that the Navy knew the submarine was in distress, that signals were detected, that the location was identified, and that a decision was made at a level of command so high that its name never appeared in any document. That a rescue operation would reveal something far more damaging than the loss of 99 men. This is not speculation without foundation. History has shown with brutal consistency that military institutions across the world have made exactly this kind of calculation before. They have weighed human lives against institutional reputation, against political consequence, against the cold mathematics of strategic secrecy, and they have chosen secrecy. Not once, not twice, again, and again, and again. There was a pattern here that researchers could not ignore, because this submarine was not the only one. In the same year, 1968, 4 submarines from 4 different nations disappeared beneath the ocean. 4 vessels, 4 governments, 4 official explanations, and 4 sets of families, who were told versions of the same careful, managed, deliberately incomplete story. The statistical probability of 4 separate, unconnected, coincidental disappearances in a single calendar year was something that analysts found extraordinarily difficult to accept. And so the question shifted. It was no longer simply, what happened to this submarine? The question became something far larger, far darker. What was happening in those oceans? That so many governments were willing to let their own men die, rather than explain. The answer to that question sits in the final chapter of this story. In the courtrooms, the declassified archives, and the cold, quiet testimony of deep-sea technology that has finally seen what human eyes were never meant to. There is a moment in every cover-up when the institution believes that enough time has passed, that the families are too old, too tired, too broken to keep fighting. They were wrong. Decades have a way of doing 2 things simultaneously. They exhaust the human spirit, and they loosen the grip of those who control information. Files get declassified. Officials grow old and their conscience grows louder. Technology advances beyond what the original architects of secrecy ever anticipated. And slowly, the way dawn breaks over a dark ocean, the truth begins to surface. The families of 99 men did not disappear with their loved ones. They remained. They organized. They hired lawyers with the money they did not have. They filed requests for documents that were denied, then filed again, and again, and again. Some of these women were widowed in their 20s. They fought this battle into their 70s. Some of them died, still waiting for an answer that their government had decided they did not deserve. Their children carried the fight forward, and their children's children after them. Because when a family loses someone to the sea, the grief does not pass, like whether it becomes a permanent resident in every room of every home. For generations, the courtrooms told their own story. Legal battles, launched by surviving families, produced moments of extraordinary revelation. In hearings spread across multiple decades, witnesses emerged who had stayed silent for years, protected by fear, by loyalty, by the very real consequences that came to those who spoke too freely about things the Navy wished to keep quiet. But age has a way of dissolving fear, and one by one, men who had served in those waters, men who had operated equipment that detected sounds that matched with terrible precision the final moments of a submarine in distress, came forward. They described what their instruments had recorded. They described the moment their commanding officers told them to log it differently, to describe it as something else, something routine, something unremarkable. They described the weight of carrying that silence for 30, 40, 50 years. One man wept in testimony, not because he was emotional by nature, but because he had spent half a century knowing exactly where 99 men were resting and being forbidden from telling their families. Then came the technology. Modern deep-sea exploration equipment, the kind that did not exist in 1968, was eventually turned toward the coordinates that researchers and families had long suspected, and what it found confirmed what the documents had hinted at, what the witnesses had quietly described, what the families had always known, in the deepest, most unscientific part of their hearts. The submarine was there, resting on the ocean floor, identifiable, located, not lost at all, never lost, simply left. The wreckage told a story that the Navy's official reports had carefully avoided. The pattern of damage, the position of the hull, the physical evidence preserved by the cold and the dark, pointed not toward mechanical failure, not toward navigational error, but toward something external, something violent, something that came from outside the vessel. And yet, even now, even with the wreckage found, even with witnesses on record, even with declassified fragments that contradict the official timeline, the full truth remains classified. Key documents are still sealed. Certain testimonies remained officially unacknowledged, and the Navy's public position has changed remarkably little. From the carefully managed statement they issued in the weeks after 99 men went silent, This is what institutional protection looks like, not in its dramatic form, not in the form of villains and conspiracies, but in its quiet, administrative, bureaucratic form. A stamp on a folder, a box checked on a declassification review, a decision made by someone who will never have to look a widow in the eye and explain why her husband was worth less than a secret 99 men went beneath the surface, trusting the institution that sent them. They deserved the truth. They deserved recovery. They deserved to have their names spoken clearly in the halls of the very government that chose silence over honesty. Instead, they got a file marked classified, a search that ended too soon, and decades of carefully managed nothing. But here, at Marine Discovery Hub, their names are not forgotten. Their story is not buried, because the ocean may keep its dead, but it cannot keep its secrets forever. This has been the story of 99 men, and the truth that still waits at the bottom of the sea. Dear friend, if this story moved something inside you, if you felt the weight of those 99 names, then they ask you gently, but sincerely, share this video with someone who deserves to know the truth. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Marine Discovery Hub will be reading every single one. And if you have not yet subscribed, remember what they said at the beginning. One small button, smaller than a teacup, easier than tying shoelaces. Press it now, because the next story is already waiting, and it is just as deep, just as dark, and just as important as this one. Until next time, from Marine Discovery Hub, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop asking why.